It all began long before the cameras ever caught the tension. Long before Irina Shayk and Cristiano Ronaldo's mother, Dolores Aveiro, were seen in the same room with that icy silence between them. The truth is, behind every perfect picture of Ronaldo's glamorous life, there was a storm quietly building, and Irina was at the very center of it. When Irina entered Ronaldo's world, she wasn't just stepping into the life of the world's biggest football superstar. She was entering a fortress guarded by the most powerful figure in his personal life, his mother. Dolores Aveiro wasn't just a parent. She was the pillar of Ronaldo's journey, the woman who raised him through poverty, who stood beside him when the world doubted him, and who believed that no woman could ever truly understand her son the way she did so. When Irina appeared, elegant, confident, breathtaking, Dolores saw not just beauty, but danger. She feared that her son's heart, and maybe even his loyalty, was slipping away. Irina, on the other hand, was a woman of her own world, raised by strength, polished by fashion, and shaped by independence. She wasn't the kind of woman to bow to anyone, not even the mother of her boyfriend. The first meetings between them were polite. Smiles were exchanged, words were careful, and gestures were practiced. But beneath those smiles was a growing discomfort. Dolores wanted to see warmth, the kind of family closeness she imagined her son's future wife would bring. But Irina's world was different. Her fame, her lifestyle, her independence. It all seemed to Dolores like distance, not love. And for Irina, Dolores's watchful eyes felt like judgment. Every time she entered the house, she could feel it. The quiet whispers, the subtle disapproval, the feeling that she was never enough for Cristiano. She tried to connect, to show kindness, to be a part of the family. But Dolores had already made up her mind. This relationship would never last. Ronaldo, caught in the middle, was torn. He loved Irina, her elegance, her charm, her calm confidence. But his mother's words echoed in his heart. "She's not the one for you, Cristiano. She doesn't understand our family." Those words would repeat, again and again, until they began to carve small cracks in what seemed like a perfect romance. Behind closed doors, the situation grew worse. At family dinners, Irina's quiet nature was mistaken for arrogance. When she didn't show up for one of Dolores's family gatherings, it was seen as disrespect. And when she preferred spending time in Madrid or traveling for her modeling work instead of visiting Ronaldo's home in Madeira, the judgment only grew. Dolores began to speak more openly. Not with anger, but with disappointment. She wanted her son's life to be surrounded by family, children, and stability. But Irina's world seemed far from that. Then came the turning point, the day when silence turned into confrontation. It was during a holiday visit, one of those rare moments when everyone was gathered together under one roof. Dolores, proud and protective, had been hearing rumors. Rumors that Irina wasn't treating her son well, that she didn't support him during his injuries, that she was distant even when he needed comfort. Whether those rumors were true or not, to a mother, they were enough to ignite fire. That evening, the atmosphere was heavy. Irina walked in, calm and poised, unaware of what was about to unfold. Ronaldo was in another room on the phone with his agent, while his mother sat silently in the living room. The TV played softly, but the silence between them was louder than any sound. When Irina sat down, Dolores turned, her eyes sharp, her voice trembling but controlled. "You don't love him the way he needs to be loved," she said. Irina froze. She didn't know how to respond. The words hit her like a slap, not because of their volume, but because of what they meant. "Excuse me," Irina said softly. "You don't understand what family means," Dolores continued. "You care about your career, your photos, your travels. But my son needs someone who stands beside him, not someone who only appears when it's convenient." For a few seconds, Irina stayed silent. Then, something in her snapped. She stood up, her face pale but her voice firm. "With all due respect, I have stood beside him when the cameras weren't there. I have supported him when no one else did. Don't judge me just because I live differently." The room went cold. The words hung between them, sharp and real. Dolores didn't shout, but her expression said everything. And Irina, feeling her dignity crumble under the weight of judgment, turned and walked away. That night, Ronaldo returned to a house divided. He didn't know the full story, only fragments. His mother's voice saying Irina disrespected her, and Irina's tears when she told him she couldn't take it anymore. For the first time, the man who could conquer stadiums found himself powerless at home. The next few weeks were chaos. Irina distanced herself, refusing to attend family gatherings. Dolores refused to even mention her name. What had started as misunderstanding now burned into something deeper, resentment, and then came the event that sealed everything. The violent outburst that tabloids would later twist and magnify. It wasn't violence in the physical sense, it was emotional, verbal, and raw. During a family dinner, when Dolores once again confronted Irina about her attitude and coldness, Irina broke. "You will never accept anyone in his life," she said, voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You think no one is good enough. Maybe that's why he'll always be alone. Because you can't let go." Those words hit Dolores like a knife. The family froze. Ronaldo stood in shock. Irina, realizing what she'd said, tried to back away, but it was too late. Dolores, furious and heartbroken, told her to leave the house and never come back. That was the night it ended. The night when the quiet feud turned into open war. Irina left in tears. Ronaldo tried to calm both sides, but the damage was done. Dolores couldn't forgive the words. Irina couldn't forgive the pain. And from that night on, Ronaldo's mother never saw Irina the same way again. The relationship that once looked like it might lead to marriage dissolved slowly, like a flame losing oxygen. Behind the smiles on social media, the truth was bitter. Irina and Ronaldo were already worlds apart. Years later, when Ronaldo moved on and started a new life with Georgina Rodriguez, the wounds from that storm still lingered. Dolores welcomed Georgina, not just as a partner for her son, but as a new beginning. Someone who understood family, who respected her presence, who seemed to heal the scar that Irina left behind. But deep down, in those rare quiet moments, both women, Irina and Dolores, would remember that night. One saw it as a moment of betrayal, the other as a moment of defense. And Ronaldo, the man in the middle, would forever carry the memory of the two strongest women in his life standing on opposite sides of love. Because sometimes, love isn't destroyed by hate. It's destroyed by misunderstanding, by pride, and by the silence that grows when no one wants to say, "I'm sorry." And for Ronaldo, that silence between his mother and Irina would echo far longer than anyone knew. The night after Irina walked out of Ronaldo's house, the silence was unbearable. For someone like Cristiano, whose life was filled with cheers, cameras, and endless noise, silence had never felt this heavy. The man who could lead nations on the football field could not lead peace inside his own home. And between his mother and Irina Shayk, that peace was gone forever. Irina didn't look back that night. She left the house quietly, without shouting, without a final goodbye. The moment she stepped outside, the cool Portuguese air hit her face, and that's when the tears came. They weren't tears of weakness, but of exhaustion. For years, she had tried to fit in, to understand a family that never truly wanted her to belong. But no matter how much she smiled, how many times she showed support, Dolores always found something missing. Something she could never give. When she returned to Madrid, her friends noticed the change. The woman who once walked with confidence through every red carpet now looked distant, as if her thoughts were somewhere far away. The phone calls between her and Ronaldo became shorter. The texts grew colder, and the love that once burned with passion began to fade under the weight of unspoken pain. Meanwhile, back in Madeira, Dolores Aveiro sat alone in her living room, staring at the photo of her son. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel proud. She felt empty. Deep down, she knew she had crossed a line. But for a mother who had seen her son rise from poverty to global fame, who had protected him from everything, even betrayal, the instinct to save him was stronger than guilt. In her heart, she believed she was doing the right thing. Yet Ronaldo saw things differently. To him, both women were right, and both were wrong. Irina had loved him in her own way, a quiet, mature love that didn't always show but was real. His mother, on the other hand, loved him with fierce loyalty, the kind that could destroy anything that came between them. And he, trapped between those forces, didn't know how to choose. When the news of their breakup hit the media, it exploded like wildfire. Headlines screamed, "Ronaldo and Irina split. Mother behind the breakup?" Rumors spread that Dolores had interfered, that Irina had insulted her, that the argument turned violent. But no one outside that house truly knew what had happened. The truth was far more human. A mother's fear, a woman's pride, and a man's silence. Irina was furious when she saw the news. Not because of the breakup, she had already accepted that, but because of the narrative. Suddenly, she was painted as the villain, the cold-hearted model who didn't care about Ronaldo's family. She stayed silent for a while, refusing to respond to interviews or gossip. But silence in the world of fame is dangerous. The less you say, the more they invent. And so the media created its own story, that Irina had screamed at Dolores, that she had attacked her verbally in front of family members, that she had thrown a glass in anger. None of that was true, but once the story caught fire, it was unstoppable. Overnight, Irina's image changed from adored girlfriend to unwanted outsider. Dolores, however, didn't correct the rumors. She stayed silent too. Maybe she believed it was better that way, maybe, deep down, she felt justified. But her silence was its own confession. The world began to see her as controlling, possessive, unwilling to let her son live his life freely. Ronaldo hated it all. For years, he had built his life on discipline, peace, and focus. Now his personal life was being dissected by strangers. Every press conference turned into questions about Irina. Every training session had whispers behind his back. And though he smiled for the cameras, his eyes told another story, one of heartbreak and regret. He tried reaching out to Irina a few times after the breakup. The calls were short. Sometimes she didn't pick up. When she finally did, her voice was distant. "Cristiano," she said softly, "your mother doesn't have to like me, but I can't live a life where I'm always proving my worth to someone who refuses to see it." There was silence. Then Ronaldo said what he had always feared, "I understand." It was over. Not with shouting, not with betrayal, but with quiet surrender. For months after that, Irina focused on her career, but her heart wasn't in it. Behind the photo shoots and the interviews, she carried the pain of being misunderstood. Meanwhile, Ronaldo buried himself in football, training harder, scoring more, winning everything in sight. But even in victory, there was an emptiness he couldn't explain. Dolores noticed it too. She would watch him come home from matches, trophies in hand, cameras flashing. Yet his eyes seemed distant. She wanted to ask if he missed Irina, but she didn't. Pride kept her silent. One evening, while watching a replay of one of Ronaldo's games, Dolores finally spoke to her daughter, Katia. "He's winning everything, but he looks sad," she said. Katia hesitated, then replied, "Maybe because he lost something that winning can't replace." Those words lingered in Dolores's mind for months. She began to wonder, had she gone too far? Had her love turned into control? She wanted her son to be happy, but had she unknowingly taken that happiness away? While Dolores battled her guilt, Irina began rebuilding herself. She traveled, focused on her work, and slowly rediscovered her independence. But deep down, the scars remained. Every time a journalist mentioned Ronaldo's name, she smiled, but her heart tightened. Then, years later, fate twisted the story once again. When Ronaldo met Georgina Rodriguez, the world watched with curiosity. She was different, quiet, humble, soft-spoken. She came from a simple background, far from the glamorous world Irina had lived in. Dolores, from the very beginning, felt something she hadn't felt before: comfort. Georgina treated her not as an obstacle, but as family. For Irina, watching from afar, it was a bittersweet sight. She had once stood where Georgina now stood, beside Ronaldo, glowing under the same spotlight. But this time, the light seemed warmer. The contrast was painful. The same woman who had once been rejected was now replaced by someone adored by the family she could never win over. Irina didn't hate them. She had moved beyond that, but she couldn't forget. She once said in an interview years later, with a gentle smile hiding the truth, "When you love someone deeply, even distance can't erase what you felt. It just teaches you how strong you were to survive it." Behind those words was a story few knew. The heartbreak that shaped her, the misunderstanding that destroyed her love, and the silent war that made Dolores vow never to let such pain touch her family again. But the world, as always, saw only fragments. The glamour, the smiles, the new beginnings. What they didn't see was that, in their own ways, all three, Irina, Dolores, and Ronaldo, were broken by the same thing: love mixed with pride. And sometimes that combination is more dangerous than hate. As time passed, Irina moved on publicly, but her heart still carried shadows. Ronaldo continued to rise. New trophies, new family, new joy. Dolores aged gracefully, her love for her son never changing, though deep inside she sometimes wished she had handled things differently that night. Because even if she'd won back her son's loyalty, she had lost something too. His trust in the idea that love could exist without approval. And that was the real cost of Irina Shayk's outburst. Not the words, not the anger, but the chain of emotions that changed their lives forever. Years passed, and the world around Cristiano Ronaldo changed faster than anyone could imagine. Stadiums echoed with his name, trophies lined his walls, and his smile, that famous confident smile, seemed brighter than ever. But the people closest to him, the ones who had seen the quiet moments when the cameras turned away, knew that some part of him had never fully healed. The ghosts of the past still whispered in his silence, especially when he looked at his family, at Georgina, at his children. Because somewhere deep in his heart, he knew how fragile peace could be. For Dolores Aveiro, time had softened her pride but deepened her reflection. She had become a grandmother now, surrounded by laughter, birthdays, and the kind of love she always dreamed her son would have. Georgina was kind, humble, and respectful. Everything Dolores thought a daughter-in-law should be. But sometimes, when the house grew quiet and everyone had gone to sleep, she would sit in her armchair, watching old photos of Cristiano's past. One of them being a photo she had once tried to ignore. Ronaldo and Irina, smiling together in the sunlight and that frozen moment of time. She could see what she hadn't seen before. The joy in her son's eyes, the comfort in his posture, the tenderness in Irina's smile. It wasn't just a relationship of beauty or glamour. It was love, pure and rare. And now, years later, Dolores could admit to herself. Maybe she had judged too quickly. Maybe her fear of losing her son had blinded her to what he had truly found. But regret is a quiet visitor. It doesn't announce itself. It just lingers in the spaces where words were never spoken. Dolores never called Irina, never apologized. Some things she believed were better left in the past. But deep down, she knew. Some wounds don't fade with silence. They fade only with forgiveness. Meanwhile, far away in New York, Irina Shayk had built a life of her own. She walked the runways, appeared on covers, and became one of the most recognized models in the world. To everyone else, she was untouchable, the woman who moved on gracefully, who never looked back. But those who truly knew her, those rare few close to her heart, understood that some chapters of her life were never closed. In interviews, she avoided mentioning Ronaldo. When asked, she smiled politely and shifted the topic. But sometimes, late at night, when the city lights faded and silence wrapped around her apartment, she would remember him. His laughter, his discipline, his warmth. And the night she lost it all. She never forgot Dolores either. That final confrontation, those words that burned both of them, replayed in her mind for years. Not because she hated Dolores, but because she wished she had stayed calm, wished she had understood that behind the woman's anger was fear. The fear of losing her son to a world she didn't understand. Irina wasn't the same person anymore. Fame had hardened her, but experience had softened her heart. She knew now that love isn't always enough to fight the battles that pride creates. She had learned the painful truth that sometimes the one you love most can't protect you. Not because they don't care, but because they're trapped between loyalty and love. And that's exactly where Cristiano had been. Ronaldo had moved on, yes, but even after all the years, there were moments when the past found its way back. Once, during an interview, when asked if he still spoke to Irina, he paused. The question was simple, but the silence that followed was not. Then he smiled softly and said, "Life goes on. I wish her happiness, always." To the world, it was just a polite response. But to those who had followed his story, it was something deeper. An echo of unfinished emotion at home. Georgina sometimes sensed that silence too. She never felt threatened by Irina's memory. She knew where Ronaldo's heart was, but she could see it in his eyes when old memories resurfaced. The respect, the nostalgia, the sadness that comes from knowing how things could have been different if time and pride had been kinder. One day, while watching their children play, Georgina asked him softly, "Do you ever regret anything?" Ronaldo looked at her thoughtful, then said, "Not regret, but I do wonder. Sometimes we lose people not because we stop loving them, but because life doesn't wait for us to fix our mistakes." That was the truth he had carried for years, the truth no trophy could erase. But fate, unpredictable as always, had one final twist left in their story. During a charity gala in Paris, many years after their breakup, Ronaldo and Irina crossed paths again for the first time. The crowd was glamorous, the music elegant, and yet for a moment, the world around them went still. She was standing across the room, graceful, poised, radiant as ever. Their eyes met, and in that second, all the years vanished. They didn't speak at first. Just a soft nod, a faint smile. The kind that two people share when words aren't needed anymore. Later, near the exit, Irina approached him quietly. "You look happy," she said. Ronaldo smiled. "I am. And you?" Irina nodded. "I found peace. It took time, but I did." He looked at her, his voice gentle. "I'm glad." There was a pause. Then Irina added softly, "Your mother must be proud. She got everything she wanted for you." Ronaldo hesitated, then said something that carried the weight of every year between them. "Maybe, but if she knew what it cost, I think she'd feel differently." They both smiled, not bitterly, but with the understanding that comes only with time. Then Irina said, "We were young, and love was too heavy for us to carry with pride in the way." And with that, she walked away. No tears, no anger, just peace. The kind that comes after a storm has long passed, leaving behind clear skies and quiet hearts. When Ronaldo returned home that night, he sat beside his mother. Dolores was older now, softer, wiser. They spoke for a while about the children, the family, the usual things. But then, without warning, Ronaldo said, "I saw Irina tonight." Dolores looked up, surprised. "And she looked happy," he said. Then, after a pause, he added, "I think you would have liked her now." Dolores didn't reply right away. She took a deep breath and said quietly, "Maybe I should have liked her then." That single sentence carried years of regret. For a brief moment, both of them sat in silence. Not the kind that hurts, but the kind that heals. And that was how the story ended. Not with hate, not with revenge, not with scandal, but with acceptance. Dolores learned that love sometimes means letting go. Irina learned that forgiveness is freedom. And Ronaldo, the man caught between them, learned that peace doesn't come from choosing sides, but from understanding both. Because in the end, no matter how loud the world becomes, the truth is always quiet. And in that quiet, Irina Shayk, Cristiano Ronaldo, and Dolores Aveiro each found their own kind of peace. As the narrator's voice fades, we are left with one final thought, that sometimes the most violent storms in life happen not between enemies, but between people who once loved each other too much to understand where love ends and pride begins. And that was the story behind Irina Shayk's Outburst. Not a tale of hatred, but of love lost, pride defended, and the long road toward forgiveness. And so, as the lights fade on this chapter of Ronaldo's life, we're reminded of something deeper, that behind every headline, behind every photo, there are hearts that have broken, healed, and learned in silence. Irina Shayk wasn't the villain. Dolores Aveiro wasn't the enemy. They were both women who loved the same man in different ways, one as a mother, one as a partner. And sometimes, love collides instead of connects. Time may have moved on, but the echoes of that storm still whisper through the years. Because no matter how far they've come, a part of their story will always live quietly in the spaces between forgiveness and memory. In the end, Irina found her peace. Dolores found her understanding. And Ronaldo, the son, the lover, the legend, finally found balance between the past and the present. Life teaches us that love doesn't always end with forever. Sometimes, it ends with acceptance. And that acceptance is its own kind of happy ending. This was the untold story behind Irina Shayk's violent outburst at Ronaldo's mother. The truth that the cameras never showed, and the emotions that time could never completely erase. If you felt the emotion in this story, don't forget to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe for more powerful untold stories only here on WSN World Sports News. Because every story has a side the world never sees.